Good morning to our listeners here on Long Island. It's a pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Suffolk Matters, where Suffolk County meets Suffolk AME. Okay, so this morning my guest is Ryan Stanton, who's the political director of the Long Island Federation of Labor. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Dan.
So, we've had Roger on before, Roger Clayman, who's the executive director, but let's just remind our listeners what the Long Island Federation of Labor is.
Sure. So, Long Island Federation of Labor is the regional entity of the AFL-CIO. For those not familiar with the labor movement as a whole, that's our umbrella organization. So we have a number of affiliates that represent workers in a variety of industries, anywhere from the construction industry. So folks might be familiar with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the UA, which represents the plumbers and steam fitters. Then we also represent the retail sector of the private industry in this nation with the Retail Wholesale Department Store Union. And then, public-private transport workers union represents your bus drivers, both in schools and public transit, as well as public employees. So teachers, the service providers
Right.
For our municipal governments across the island.
Sure.
So the Long Island Federation of Labor is that regional organization representing over 250,000 workers here on the island.
Yeah, and I think an important distinction, I guess best for our listeners to understand, union workers and non-union workers, we're all the same. We're working for a reason. We're all getting, into our cars in the morning and or onto public transportation and over to do something, and exchanging time for money. The distinction, I guess, for organized labor is collectively we've made the decision that we're all going to stand together and work together towards a common goal. Mutual aid and protection, I think, is the language that, is most commonly referenced. But working people in organized labor and working people that are not organized, we're all people with jobs. And that means life happens, right? Kids got to stay home sick one day. Maybe there's some other, troubles in your life that, it just need to be addressed. And the advantage in being in organized labor is there's predetermined protections in place. You can't get in trouble because your kid got sick or your boss doesn't like the way you dress that day or, so having contracts in place that define work rules provides some comfort to the workforce that's providing, their time, providing labor in exchange for the profitability of the company or making municipal government work or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you sort of drew the distinction, but also highlighted how much the labor movement and organized labor is not just about their members, although that's our first and foremost priority. The reality is we support policies that support working people across the board. Just some quick examples, not too distant history. In New York State, we were successful in passing paid family leave. We were successful in raising the minimum wage. And whether you're a union worker or a non-union worker, those are policies that are going to put either dollars in your pocket or benefits available to you so that, God forbid, something happens to your child. God forbid something happens to your loved one. You're able to take advantage of something like paid family leave to ensure that you can be there for your family when it counts. And so whether you're a union member or a non-union member, that's something that you're going to benefit from, and those are the types of policies that we support in organized labor.
Sure, and sometimes people get hung up on maybe some of the wage components and then the concept of trying to make sure that organized labor is fairly compensated, and what that really is at its heart about is making sure that the communities that they live in also thrive. If in a working situation an employer pays the very bare minimum to let someone, come in, the least that they could possibly offer to bring someone in and do the work. One, we see that sometimes the product that they produce is inferior. And two, they're not really supporting their community. They can't afford to do other things. So the whole idea of organized labor and, sometimes that push for wages, I think, people sometimes get upset about. But the whole idea is to raise the industry as a whole. If organized labor is paying for a particular job, whatever that number may be, and the argument being we want them to be able to support the community, the unorganized folks, they end up getting a bump up as well. So, again, at the heart of all of what organized labor does is, yes, absolutely for their members, but it's for community and it's for industries as a whole.
Sure. I think one of the policies that was discussed in the state legislative session last year ended up being a little bit controversial, and I think it's because largely there was a lot of misinformation out there on it. Is the definition of public works? Why do I bring that up? Well, you just talked about the value in raising wages for workers, union or non-union,
Right.
And in short, definition of public works clarifies exactly what is or is not a public works project. And for the listeners, when I say public works project, I mean if we're going to invest our tax dollars in something, right? So that's our money, that's our community's money.
Right.
What are we investing it in? And what qualifies as a public works project? So this legislation clarified exactly what qualifies as public works and said, okay, if it's a public works project, prevailing wage will apply. Now, again, I'm throwing out terms that some of the listeners might not be familiar with.
Yeah.
So what is prevailing wage? Prevailing wage is outlined in our state constitution, and the Department of Labor has a schedule of wages that says exactly what the prevailing wage is in a particular region for a particular skill.
Right.
And by establishing a fair wage that happens to be represented by the wage negotiated in union contracts,
right,
we're ensuring that the people that are doing work on our public works projects, so again, I'll remind everybody, those are the projects that are funded with our tax dollars, are going to go to good union jobs, but good non-union jobs. If it's a public works project, it just says this is what you have to pay according to the Department of Labor's state wage schedule. So why is that important in building the strength of our communities? Because it ensures that if a developer is going to bid on a public project, they're not pitting the workers of one company against the other. They're obligated to pay the same wage, whether you're developer A or developer B.
Right.
And then the public is going to get the best return on their dollar because the developer that's best at that particular type of development is going to win the bid because they're no longer pitting their workforce against one another for a lower wage. They're saying, I can do this at this price, and somebody else is saying they can do it at a different price. The reality is the folks that are going to win those bids are the ones that are going to be the best at what they do.
Sure. Absolutely. And that's, again, another aspect of that that's very important is it also ensures that the money stays regional. If you're going to start pulling people in from other parts of the country to try and, because they're in a right-to-work state and they're not earning well, they may be motivated by what's an unfair wage in New York, but is better from better than what they're making, where they're from, and then they take your tax dollars with them back to their other state. So we were getting into a lot of policy stuff, and as political director, you see this on a day-to-day basis, especially we've got the coming legislative season coming up in Albany, and there's a lot of anticipated let's call it fun and excitement. and so I just want to talk a little bit about, some priority issues that you guys are looking at, for the coming, the coming year.
Yeah, I think something that doesn't get talked about often enough, but it's a challenge that all working people face is the cost of childcare.
Yeah.
In New York State, it's significant, and on Long Island, like many other things, it's significant. And so, a lot of folks will spend anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 a year on childcare, depending on 1, 2 children.
Yeah, that's post-tax money too, right? So they earn their money, they're taxed on it, and then they spend that rate. Yeah,
exactly. And so what we've seen is a program called Facilitated Childcare Enrollment, piloted in other parts of the state. So specifically, it exists in the 5 boroughs as well as 8 counties in upstate New York. So last session, we made a push to get that pilot program expanded to Nassau and Suffolk County.
Sure.
And what is facilitated childcare enrollment? So in short, what it does is it says, if you earn between 200 and 275% of the federal poverty level, in real dollars, that's, if you're a family of 3 making $40,000, you're in that window.
Right.
And you may say to yourself, $40,000 on Long Island, that's nothing, particularly for a family of 3.
Right.
And this program would be a cap on out-of-pocket expenses for child care. That family would still have a family share portion. It would still be spending dollars to pay for their child care,
Right.
but it would be subsidized child care to the extent that there would be a cap on what their personal income is, how much of that they're spending on that particular expense. And, why do I bring up 200 to 275% of the federal poverty level? Well, number one, that's the parameters under which the federal dollars can be used.
Right.
But number two, a lot of people forget that that's an income range that is not available. There are no public subsidies, public assistance available to those folks.
Right.
Right. So, we have elected officials of all stripes that are constantly looking for ways to incentivize folks to improve their career, improve their lives, and earn their way off of public assistance, which benefits the community, right? We want people to be earning more in their pocket and spending it at their local businesses.
Yes.
Unfortunately, there's a cliff in the way a lot of our social programs are structured. And when somebody hits that 200% of federal poverty, so again, $40,000 for a family of 3 on Long Island,
Not much.
there's nothing available to you. You're on your own. Good luck.
Right.
Well, this program's been very successful in the 5 boroughs. It's been very successful upstate. And we're saying to the legislature, why not Long Island?
Right. That makes sense. And again, that range of earnings that you're talking about for a family of 3, that makes a huge difference in their life. It makes opportunities open for them that they otherwise couldn't get, with the goal in mind, of course, that this isn't, the idea isn't, here's free money. We're going to take tax dollars and we're just going to throw it at you. And when you say successfully run in the 5 boroughs, that means that they're seeing that those people are now advancing out of that range. They're doing better for themselves. They're taking a little bit of that resource, applying it to their lives in a way that's going to get them even further down the road.
Right. I mean, those people, rather than having a loved one choose to stay home and not work because the numbers don't make sense just based on the cost of childcare.
Sure.
You got people that are able to participate in the economy now that would have otherwise been subject to staying home because it didn't make financial sense for them to be participants in strengthening our community and strengthening our economy through work. And so largely it's been successful, and it just, you said it changes lives. You have somebody that's making $40,000 a year, and if they're spending $15,000 on childcare, that's nearly half their income.
Right.
And if we're talking net income, that's more than half their income. So
exactly.
That's on a weekly basis, throwing half your paycheck at one expense.
Yeah, and that's a reality here on Long Island. It's certainly in Suffolk County. So how can our listeners assist in this effort?
So we talked about earlier, how unions and organized labor fight for policies that benefit not just their members, but working people as a whole. I'm happy to say that if this program is expanded to Suffolk, to Nassau, it's the type of program that's going to be available to any working person that falls in that eligibility range.
Right.
So any and all listeners that want to see that expansion happen, they can contact their legislators, particularly the members in the majority of the Senate and the Assembly, and ask them to support this policy. We were fortunate that on Long Island we had a leader in Monica Martinez in the Senate, and 2 leaders in Mikhail Salages and Kimberly Jean-Pierre in the Assembly, really spearheading this issue. They were successful in garnering the support of every one of their colleagues here on Long Island for this issue.
Yeah.
It unfortunately fell off the table at the end of budget negotiations, but I think the more the listeners chime in, contact each one of these people and say, listen, this is a priority for us.
Right.
It's going to be at the top of the list, and when push comes to shove, because we're in a tight fiscal climate, this is not going to be one of the things that falls off the table. Right.
Yeah, and it's important. We say, we talk amongst ourselves, at work, at home. We say, we want things to improve around here. Well, we've got to take steps to make them improve. And this would be a step that's like that, increasing the people that surround you in the world, increasing their stake in the community. That improves quality of life for the whole neighborhood.
Absolutely.
So another issue is Opportunities Long Island. So what is that?
Yeah, so Opportunities Long Island is a pre-apprenticeship program for the building and construction trades. What does that mean? So the Building and Construction Trades Council of Nassau and Suffolk County, they're a council representing each of the individual trades within the construction industry. So again, plumbers, electricians, iron workers, steam fitters, sheet metal workers, and each one of those affiliates has an apprenticeship program that ensures that their members are the most skilled and safest working workforce in that industry. You know, a lot of people don't realize that in the construction industry, one worker every 5 days dies on the job.
It's awful. Yeah.
Once every 5 days, you know, there should be a significant outrage across society that that's acceptable. And as a labor movement, we don't accept that. So we ensure our workers are trained and work safe. And so I don't know the exact numbers, but of those deaths, about 85% of them, roughly, and don't quote me on that percentage, but it's near that number.
Easily over 50%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So those are taking place on non-union construction sites.
Yep.
So Opportunities Long Island is a direct entry pre-apprenticeship program. It provides opportunities to communities that are slated for future development to be recruited into this program and to develop some of the basic skills that will allow them to be successful in those apprenticeship programs administered by the Building and Construction Trades.
Right.
And so the Long Island Federation of Labor, we partnered with the Building and Construction Trades, Suffolk County Department of Labor, and a number of other folks across the island and throughout the region to get this program up and running, recruited from communities such as Huntington Station, which has been slated for redevelopment, some of which is underway,
Right.
To ensure that the folks in that community are going to develop the skills and training necessary to be successful in that industry and, you know, hopefully work on that job, but maybe not, you know, specifically jobs in Huntington Station. When they are afforded the opportunity to go through the apprenticeship programs, they're put to work because across the region and throughout the jurisdiction of that particular local union, because as a union, we have a duty and a responsibility to put our members to work.
Sure.
And so, yes, there's a project in Huntington Station, but we've said we're going to invest in the community. We're going to invest in you to ensure that our region as a whole is successful, and that whether or not you're able to do work on this particular project in Huntington Station, you'll have the skills necessary to have a career in construction and work anywhere there's a project.
Right. And, you know, you talk about that training component. You know, I mean, there is a serious education that goes on inside of organized labor to make sure that the investment in the workforce remains. So, you know, making sure that people know not only just how to do their job safely so that they can get through their workday okay, but how they can do their job safely so that the thing that they're building causes no harm to people, and that, you know, the people that they're working around on a day-to-day basis. You know, I mean, think about a roofer. You know, the guys up on that roof, you know, when you're properly trained, you're properly educated, not only are you tied off so you don't fall off the roof, because guess what? The wind's different on, you know, up higher than it is down lower, and you could get caught with a gust and blown off the building. So you're tied off, you're safe, you're not going to fall, but you also have the training to know, hey, listen, you know, if I toss this off the side of the building, I might tag somebody in the head, and what seems like a small, you know, a small thing up here, when it gains velocity and gets to the ground, it could be very dangerous. You know, and that's just one of many, many examples, but I think it's a very important thing that organized labor provides to its workforce because they believe in the people that they're investing in.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about believing in the people. So I referenced one particular community, and I happen to know offhand that in Huntington Station, you know, there's a community benefits agreement, which is something that a number of developers across Long Island have come to the community when attempting to redevelop it to offer benefits to the folks that live there. And so that's one of the ones that we were able to be a part of, not in necessarily the official community benefits agreement, by saying we're going to recruit from here. And in recruiting from Huntington Station, we've had, I believe, 20 graduates through Opportunities Long Island. 19 of those folks have been placed with local unions.
Nice.
It's fair to say that each one of those 19 people over the course of their apprenticeship and becoming a journeyman
Right.
will, if they're put to work on unionized construction sites, are going to earn six figures. If you do quick math, that's $2 million of annual income over and over in the community of Huntington Station that did not otherwise exist.
Sure. Right. And going back into that community, you know, if you're coming from, you know, we talked about the earlier number, that $40,000 mark, and now you're in the six-figure mark, where is that extra money going? It's going into your house. It's going into your family. It's going into the community. You're going out to eat. You're going, you know, using goods and services provided by the community. So that extra money is extra money actually for other people as well. It's not just, you know, their compensation. It becomes compensation for other people that otherwise didn't exist.
100% right. And the only way that continues to happen is when people in our communities continue to stand up and say, if there's going to be development here, it needs to be union work. Because,
Sure.
as I just pointed out, we're making sure we deliver for the community because we're invested. These are our neighbors. These are people we care about. We're interested in seeing everybody be successful.
No, and you know, here's a thing that I've said before. You know, the labor movement definitely understands its mission. It understands why it does, you know, all the things that we do. And we've been articulating some of those things this morning. And I think it's very important for the rest of the world to hear. Too many times inside the labor movement, you know, or rather outside the labor movement, their only exposure is to maybe negative things. You know, people don't buy newspapers for good news. You know, it's generally the headline that catches your eye and makes you buy the paper is that negative thing. And when labor is in the paper, it's because there's some sort of dispute. Something's not going well. But the reasons for those fights are the reasons that we're talking about this morning. You know, the labor movement overall is really actually a group of people that got together and said, we want this community to be better. Not the labor community, communities we live in, our family lives, our homes, the businesses that surround us. And that's the whole driving force behind everything that organized labor does.
Yep.
So another initiative you guys are looking at and working on is actually offshore wind and water quality issues. So, you know, why has Long Island Federation of Labor been so supportive of the offshore wind projects?
So offshore wind is, you know, for those, and it should be self-evident, but in the off chance it's not, it's an alternative energy source, right? And so if we're going to begin bringing online alternative sources of energy, we need to think about the folks that are being impacted that are in the energy generation industry right now.
Right.
And on Long Island, a large percentage of that industry earns a good living wage that allows them to buy a home in their community, allows them to have a family, allows them to send their kids to college,
Right.
coach Little League, have the time off to be able to do that. So those are the types of jobs that are going to be supplanted as we pursue alternative energy. And so what's been so important to us is ensuring that as we're making environmental decisions, people are in the economic position to make responsible environmental decisions,
Right.
to ensure that as those jobs come offline, we can embrace the industry because the industry is bringing online a number of good union jobs that are going to come with good wages,
Right.
that are going to allow people to buy a home, to support their family, to educate their children in the pursuit of higher education. And so if we're going to supplant one industry or support one industry, we need to make sure that the wages coming online, the benefits coming online, are going to be of equal value to the community.
Sure. And, you know, with that in mind, you know, I guess the term that's used is stranded assets. You know, when an industry kind of dies off and another one replaces it, it's not just the folks that are doing the job. It's also, you know, in some instances, it's the buildings they worked in and all the support that went around it as well. So it's, you know, it is something that needs to be done responsibly and not just roll the dice and let's see what happens. Another issue that you guys are working on is water quality.
Yeah, so January of this year, the Suffolk County Executive, Steve Ballone, put before the voters, with the support of the legislature, several permissive referenda that said, we've secured state and federal dollars to invest in sewer infrastructure in your community.
Right.
Do you want it? And resoundingly, voters said absolutely. And we played we made a point to play a part in that because, number one, water quality on Long Island is a top priority.
Yes.
We're surrounded by water. We swim in water. It supports recreation. It supports our regional economy. It supports tourism.
Yeah.
So there are a variety of factors to consider here. And number two, the direct investment ultimately is going to support our infrastructure. It's going to expand our infrastructure. And with that, it's going to support union jobs. So we have the obvious selfish benefit of trying to deliver for our members.
Right.
But again, I'll bring it back to the community. Living on an island, when you go swimming in the Great South Bay,
Right.
I'm a young professional without offering up my age. And even in my brief lifetime,
Yeah.
I've seen the water quality in the Great South Bay degrade.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate that we've had a shellfishing industry that is essentially non-existent.
Right.
That once served I believe it's half the clams across the country came from the Great South Bay.
Sure did. Yeah.
So that's no longer true. And we have seen when we've made these investments in other areas of the island, clam beds have come back, water quality has improved. And so that only benefits our tourism economy, that benefits our infrastructure, it benefits the workers that are able to service that infrastructure to ensure that our residents receive the services that they deserve.
Sure. And, you just mentioned County Executive Steve Bellone. And, before our time is up, I just want to get the position of Long Island Federation of Labor and, the county executive race. Amy, we talked a bunch at different points in time about our process, and you guys have an exhaustive process as well. But why don't you share with us, where you guys landed and why?
Yeah, so from a process standpoint, as I outlined in the beginning of the interview, our labor movement is a diverse labor movement. We have folks from retail, healthcare, public sector, private sector, building and construction trades.
Sure.
And so we gather the leaders and we gather the members of each of those organizations. We conduct an interview process with each of the candidates. So specific to county executives race, we had both candidates come and sit before us, and they outline their vision for the future. And we ask questions on how their vision is going to impact working people. At the end of the day, we've supported the county executive's opponent for other races, and he's a good man. But
Right.
County Executive Steve Bellone is absolutely the better man for this job. He's supported a number of the things that we talked about in investments in infrastructure. He went to the state and federal government and made the case that Long Island needs dollars to support infrastructure, because if we don't invest in our infrastructure, we're going to continue to be devastated by things like Superstorm Sandy.
Right.
So the sewer dollars that I talked about that voters resoundingly supported,
Sure.
those were because of the hard work of the current administration. There's other projects that he's made a priority that put folks to work.
Yeah.
And we see that as responsible decision making. We see that as responsible investments in our community. And so it was an obvious decision to a number of our affiliates to get behind the incumbent and make sure that Steve Bellone is able to see his vision through and ensure that the resources we enjoy here in Suffolk County remain available to the residents here.
Yeah, and one of the things that we noticed and we put out to our members is County Executive Bellone is someone who puts forward his vision. Sometimes he won't even be around to see these things come to fruition. When he was in the town of Babylon, he did things that made it so that the residents in the town of Babylon would be better off, but he wasn't going to be there anymore. And there's some initiatives that he's put into place, like some of the things we've talked about this morning, that won't be finalized until after he's done with his next term. So there's something about an elected official saying, I'm really here for the people that I'm really here for, and not just to get reelected. So that was an important distinction for us as well. So Ryan, I want to thank you for joining us this morning. I think the work that you guys do is phenomenal. It wouldn't be any surprise as someone in the labor movement myself to say the same thing. But I think that Long Island Federation of Labor and the groups underneath that umbrella have all been doing a great job driving that bus, so to speak, to raise the standing in the community of all working people. So I want to thank you for joining me this morning. And to our listeners, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.